Hello, we are Group 2. This is Group Deliverable number 2. Our company is Los Pollos Hermanos. I'm Ryan Ellingson.
I'm Mike Moore. I'm Dean Benvenisti.
And I'm Sean Lipinski.
This is our business proposal. We are building a BI system to evaluate two things, the first being the quality of suppliers and the amount of chicken products that are being rejected by the Pollos Hermanos screening process, and the cost of these losses. Additionally, in an emphasis on freshness, we will be measuring the amount of time the product spends in inventory juxtaposed to the time it ought to be spending. Grain number 1 pertains to the order facts table. The grain is the amount of chicken lost and the cost per pound of chicken from a given order from a given supplier of a given product at a given time. The two fact columns are the amount lost and cost per pound. The dimensions for order facts are order ID, product ID, supplier ID, and these are some sample values for each. As always, time is another dimension, but it will be accounted for in the analysis services.
Here's our order facts table. Taking a look at it, we have two facts: amount lost coming in as an integer, and the cost per pound coming in as a numeric up to 2 decimals. And the dimensions is our order ID, also a numeric, and then supplier ID, which is the locations the chicken is coming from, which is numeric, and our product ID, also numeric. And then take a moment to look at our sample values for each one of them. Next. Here are our dimensions for the order fact. They are as follow: the chicken product, supplier, and order. Here is the slide for chicken product. The name of the table is dim chicken product. There's two attributes for this table, starting off with the primary key, which is named product ID, identified via numeric value. Take a look at the sample value. And the second attribute is product name, which is a varchar, and also take a look at the sample value there. Here is the second dimension for the order fact table. The name of the table is dim supplier. The primary key is the supplier ID, and it is a numeric value. And the second attribute is the supplier name, which is identified via varchar, and then take a look at the sample values for the. Here is the last dimension for the order fact table. The name of the table is dim order. The primary key for this table is order ID, which identifies the order via numeric value, and the second attribute is the order description, which explains the order info via varchar. And then you can take a look at the sample values for that table also.
The second grain pertains to the bucket facts. The grain is the elapsed time in inventory compared to the expected time in inventory for a given bucket at a given time at a specific location, which is a certain transit distance away from the processing facility. The two facts are time in inventory days and the expected time in inventory. The three dimensions are the bucket ID, location ID, and distance ID. Once again, time will be accounted for in the analysis services. Please take a second to look at the sample values.
For our bucket facts table, our columns are time in inventory, expected time in inventory, bucket ID, distance ID, and location ID. The data type for time in inventory, expected time in inventory, and bucket ID are all integers. Distance ID is varchar, and location ID is numeric, even though it says integer on this slide. Please take a minute to view our sample values. The dimensions for bucket fact are as follows: location, distance, and bucket. The location hierarchies are city and state. The attributes for location are location ID, which is the primary key, location name, and city ID. City and location ID are both numeric, and location name is a varchar. The attributes for dim city are city ID, city name, and state ID. The attributes for state are state ID and state name. State ID is an integer and state name is a varchar. City ID is numeric and is the primary key. City name is a varchar, and state ID is a 2-character abbreviation. The attributes for dim state are state ID, which is once again a 2-character abbreviation. State ID is a primary key. State names data type is varchar with a maximum of 30 characters. The second dimension for the bucket fact table is distance and has 2 attributes. The first attribute is distance ID, which is a primary key and is a varchar. The second attribute is distance definition and is a varchar with a maximum of 100 characters. Our final dimension is bucket. Its only attribute is bucket ID, and it identifies each bucket of chicken. Its data type is an integer, and it's a primary key.
So for our fact measures, we'll be measuring a couple things for each table, as mentioned before. The first will be bucket fact measures, and the first for this is time and inventory, which measures the days from delivery until the product is actually sold. And then that also for that table we have the expected time and inventory, which is the time it should take for the buckets to be sold. And secondly, for order fact measures, we have the amount loss, which counts just the pounds of chicken that are rejected from an order, and then the cost per pound, so that's the price paid for the chicken. And some calculated measures we can do here are for bucket fact measures, the difference between the expected time and the actual time in inventory, so that would be, if it's too long, it would be too long. And then the calculated measures for the order fact measure could be the total amount lost in the order. So that would be the amount lost multiplied by the cost per pound. And this is the physical diagram of the data mart that we will be using for order facts. As detailed before, our dimensions are dim supplier, dim order, and dim chicken product. And the primary keys of all these go into a clustered primary key on the order facts table. And of course you can see here the 2 fact columns for the order facts table, which is amount loss and cost per pound. And finally we have our bucket fact physical data mart. Of course we have our dimensions once again, dim distance, dim bucket, and dim location, which is rolled up in city and state, connected by foreign key relations as you see here. And then we have a clustered primary key featuring bucket ID, location ID, and distance ID from these 3 tables. And then our measurement facts are time inventory days and expected time in inventory. Yeah, that concludes our presentation, and we thank you for listening, and please leave any questions or comments below.